All right. I think it's time we get to the checkup, Ricky Flex, because we have a mini one, but we got some pretty big stories here. And we're gonna start off with we talked about Bob Iger, we talked about his acquisition of Lucasfilm for Disney. I think we should continue with Lucasfilm and actually talk about some info we got with Indiana Jones 5. We got some info on the setting. It's gonna be set in 1969, primarily in New York, with Indiana Jones facing Nazis during the time of the space race. And we have a quote here from one of the producers, Jez Butterworth. Quote, the simple fact is that the moon landing program was run by a bunch of ex-Nazis. How, quote unquote, ex they are is the question. And end quote. We also have some more information here. The opening sequence of this film will de-age Harrison Ford. And Harrison Ford has said, quote, this is the first time I've ever seen de-aging where I believe it, end quote. So it's just starting off with the setting here, Ricky Flicks. What do you think about Indiana Jones' last run here from Harrison Ford, once again taking on the Nazis?
Not. I feel like just not Nazis are just like every time they're in a movie, it's like automatically just like kind of more interested in it. World War II is like kind of the fancy history subject, I think. Just going back to like my student days. And it's the same thing in wartime movies like World War II and Nazis in general. That's just always like the quote unquote like sexy or appealing topic. So that's automatically going to help you here in legacy sequel maybe isn't necessarily like on its high like King like the last movie Crystal Skull that was like 15 years ago and wasn't necessarily great, and there's a reason why this hasn't been made and it wasn't made right after that. So all in all, like decent premise here. Harrison Ford's comments with the de-aging, great to hear that, but I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I see it. There's been too much experience here with de-aging technology that just hasn't really worked. The best that I could think of off the top of my head is probably RDJ in Civil War, which is saying a lot. Now mix that into an action sequence here with a Harrison Ford who's 80. Like I'll believe it when I see it. Overall, like I'm still excited for this movie. They released some stills of Mads Mikkelsen. Like I believe that he was a part of like a Nazi regime type of thing going on. Like I believe that, and all the other actresses and actors. Like yeah, so far so good. But again, believe it when I see it.
I'm in the same boat of believe it when I see it because these pictures do not sell me that this movie is going to be good. We've heard about Harrison Ford's injuries he sustained while he's on here. We hear about de-aging now. Couple things that usually don't line up for a well made or well constructed action movie. I also got to say the setting has me a little bit sketched out and almost a little bit nervous. Uh, 1969, like she'd be thinking, obviously, space race, we race to the moon. Okay, we're thinking about Cold War versus Soviets, and now we have the Nazis being intersected here or intersecting here. I don't know, it almost feels a little bit like, what are you doing? It feels like you're throwing in the Nazis just because, okay, it's one last run. What was the hit to start? Raiders of the Lost Ark. One of the best villains you could have for any type of historical set movie are Nazis, right? So it's like just throwing it back to there. I think you could do something interesting because when it comes to like the making of the atomic bomb, like you have a lot of German scientists that worked, right, on the atomic bomb for the United States. Like think Einstein, like worked on the atomic bomb for the United States. So I think it has an interesting premise where it's like, what if these they continue, right, going aside from the nuclear, right, arms race, and now they move on to the space race. Where do their loyalties lie? Do they still have connections to the Nazis? What if they still did? I think it's interesting, but you in the back of your mind, I'm gonna be thinking like, what are the Soviets doing during this time? It just you don't think Nazis 1969. So I think it's an interesting premise, but I'm not exactly sold on it yet. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good point to bring up. And I, again, like the space race, I don't really think of Nazis uh, at all. So it's going to be interesting to see how they spin that to make it work here, if it works.
Indiana Jones versus Nazis. You're playing the hits, baby. You're playing the hits for the last run, the last crusade, one might say.